There you are.
I did the most important thing besides unmuting. I paid attention to hit record on top of my script here. Hello, I'm Denise Pettengill, board member of League of Women Voters, Lawrence Douglas County. Our Hot Topics program tonight is the future of our schools. Kristen Salmons, vice president of our local league, will be moderating tonight's discussion with me. Hot Topics is a monthly meeting related to League of Women Voters' nonpartisan mission of empowering voters, defending democracy. Civil conversation and open, respectful dialogue will move us toward common ground this evening. Personal attacks, intemperate speech won't be tolerated and will result in that participant being removed from the Zoom meeting. Please keep your microphones muted and use the chat functions to submit your questions or comments. I have some introductory slides. Let's see how it goes.
And welcome, everybody. We're so glad that you joined us too.
Yes. Okay, ladies, help me with the how do I do full screen again?
Hit the slideshow button.
Ta-da. So there, we already went over this. Hot Topics, future of our schools. So here's just a bit of a background. Thank you very much, Shannon Kimball, for that great summary that you did at the board meeting. A lot of these points were drawn from that and the Lawrence Times article. So I appreciate that very much. I'm not going to read these. I'm just going to keep them up for a bit for folks to read them. Ready for the next one? All right, has everyone had a chance to read those? All right, stopping the share. So the format for tonight, I did put in the chat. This program will be recorded and will be on our website, lawrenceleague.com. We also have a resources post on our website for more background information. If you want for some more reading, I'm sure our panelists will have some more really wonderful resources to educate yourself on this issue. So our format, Alicia and Shannon with Save Our Schools 497 will present first for 10 minutes. Then Kelly and Kay from the board will follow with their 10 minutes. Then we'll take questions from the chat. So I'm going to give the briefest of introductions to our panelists so we can preserve our time. Kay Emerson is a USD 497 board member. In her first term, she's a USD 497 parent. Alicia Erickson is a parent to 2 elementary students at Woodlawn Elementary. She's the president of Save Our Schools 497. Shannon Bergquist, Broken Arrow PTA president and vice president of Save Our Schools 497. She's the parent of 2 Broken Arrow students. Kelly Jones, USD 497 board member since 2019. She is serving her second term on the board. She's also a USD 497 parent. So welcome panel, and Alicia and Shannon, you can go ahead and start.
All right, thank you. I'm Alicia, as she said, and Shannon, you want to pop and say hi real quick so they can see who you are?
Hi, I'm Shannon.
I'm going to do a quick screen share and just talk a little bit about who we are and what we wanted to kind of present tonight. Can everyone see the Save Our Schools? Good? Okay. So we are asking all board members to vote no on proceeding with any school closures at this time. We want all school closures taken off the current budget proposals so that community can work with the board in finding solutions for a long-term goal of fiscal responsibility and stability. School closures are irreversible decisions that harm academics, attendance, social and emotional health of students. Closures harm teachers and staff satisfactions, which translates to lower teacher retention. Closures harm communities by lowering property value and increasing crime. We are a group of concerned parents, staff, and community members that believe the proposals to close schools are rushed, inequitable, fiscally unsound, and erodes community support in our public school system. We have 4 central concerns I'm going to summarize and highlight. The first of which, the school district has provided less than a month between the first time it publicly announced school closures and when the board will vote to move forward on proceeding with the closing. This is a grossly inadequate time for such a monumentous decision. So we asked the board to develop a formalized process for school closures that includes more input from community stakeholders and more time for thoughtful decision-making. And we believe this requires a minimum of 12 months. Number 2, this plan is not equitable for our most marginalized students, many of whom have already been disproportionately affected by the pandemic. The burden of balancing a budget that has been unbalanced for most of a decade should not fall on the shoulders of the most marginalized community members. Number 3, not all cost savings options have been explored or presented. And similarly, the true costs of closing schools and busing students have not been fully presented. And number 4, closing schools will further erode community support in public schools. With the $92 million in bond renovations that the community will continue to pay on for the next 25 years, it's irresponsible to have some of these buildings sit empty. The community's trust will be hard to regain if another bond issue is proposed. For more details on that and some peer-reviewed articles sharing the history of that and the effects of this, I encourage you to check out our website, which is saveourschools497.org, or the League has many resources posted up. I'd like to dive into a couple clarifications regarding some information that's kind of floating out there or that's been presented. The first one is in regards to enrollment. I skipped it. There's been a claim that there's been enrollment decline that is caused or that is an effect as to why we're here. Outside of the anomaly of the pandemic, we can see that enrollment has not had a significant decline. And additionally, RSP is a company that the district hired for around $14,500 just back in 2020. And they presented a collection of multiple data points, not just using birth rate as it was recently presented. And this report shows that growth at elementary age is anticipated at 3.4% through 2024 and 25. Similarly, potential enrollment loss from families relocating outside of USD 497 has not been factored into school closures. We did an informal survey. It was dated January 12th through the 26th. We got responses of about 250 households, and they answered the question, if students in your household currently attend or will attend a school that is closed or altered by the proposed plans, how likely are you to leave USD 497? And they ranked from 1 to 5. The students whose family responded either very likely or will absolutely leave totaled 326. This is an estimated minimal loss of 1.5 million in just the state aid, and it could possibly be up to 2.8 million in total state funding loss. And these figures do not include impacts on federal funding program levels. The ripple effects from these school closures reach far beyond the schools that are being affected and closed and alter students in all but 2 of the elementary schools in one of the scenarios. This picture is from the Lawrence Times article. This is an issue that affects all of Lawrence. Now I'd like to talk about the proposed versus actual savings scene. What is being presented as total numbers for school closures is ranging in the 1 to 2 million. All these totals presented by BPEC have included a reduction of 10 FTE, which is 10 full-time positions. These are being reduced and will happen regardless of school closures and have no connection to school closures. It's that 610,000 roughly that you see there. We believe that these must be in a separate line item to have truly transparent savings. Similarly, the custodial savings are only realized if the buildings sit empty, and that does have its own cause for concern if we have empty buildings. But if the buildings are repurposed in any way, such as the Montessori school that's been proposed, then these savings are not realized. These productions need to be a separate line item rather than lumped into the total savings. And you can see how that takes that down to the yellow part of the graph of what true savings are. Over the past 2 weeks, community members have walked these graphs, those graphs of cost savings do not account for transportation or busing. So that will be another cost effect eating into that pie. The district currently provides busing for only those students living outside of 2.5 miles or more. As you can see, the chart on the left is students currently outside of the 2.5 mile range. If Liberty, we just use the example of Liberty Elementary, the mega elementary school, all of these students will be within the 2.5 mile range, but further than a mile. Over the past 2 weeks, community members have walked from some of the proposed schools to where students would be relocated. Most of these walks came in close to roughly 2 miles, some a little under, and there were many hazards, and most took about 45 minutes, and that's with adult supervision, adult pace setting, and lots of help. You can see on these maps the many hazards these students will face, as well as the history of traffic accidents at some of the most dangerous intersections that students would encounter on their walks to the respective schools. If the district will acknowledge these hazards and commit to busing, then the new cost of transportation must be presented alongside any cost savings proposal in order to create a more accurate picture of potential savings and expenses. And next, I'd like to talk a little bit about some alternative proposals that we would like to see presented. We call on the board to direct the district to include alternative proposals and in particular, address the imbalance in district administrative positions over the past decade. On this slide, you can see for 8 of the past 10 years, the district has needed to draw from the contingency reserves, and that is the blue lines. And yet in that time, the district admin positions have increased, including an increase of 6.5 positions since just 2019, which is being pointed at as the inflection point for the decline in enrollment. We want to see proposal that aligns district admin with the ratio of the 2019-2020 enrollment, and we want this to be included in all options moving forward. The proposal from last night's meeting, for example, which was option 2, came from the Executive Leadership Committee, and it was the only proposal that did not cut a single executive director position. Aligning these positions with enrollment could create an estimated savings of 1.2 million. This, of course, depends on which positions are cut. We also want to see a temporary freeze on district administrative salaries until the financial health of the district is more robust. Over the past 10 years, which is what this, I know it's kind of tiny, but the past 10 years, while we've been drawing on reserves, administrative positions have seen an average salary increase of 23.09%, and that's nearly twice as much as the classified staff average of 12.61%. The administrative is the blue and classified is green. We strongly support raises for classified staff and teachers. It is not unreasonable demand to ask for a salary freeze on upper administration. Educational institutions across the state, including KU, have had their upper administration take temporary pay cuts to better weather the effects of COVID. We also want to see a proposal that consolidates district admin and programs housed at the Educational Support Center and moves them into empty or underutilized buildings. While the sale of the building will not help with general funds, we estimate savings in excess of $200,000 from the utilities, property insurance, and custodial savings. In addition, it eliminates wasted funds for similar costs on currently empty or underutilized buildings. This one, there was a last night at the, equity team, this was proposed. It's a survey where everyone can participate, and we'd like everyone in the community to participate. It's a chance for you to get your voices out there and also to vote and see what other people are saying and comments that other people are making. And I'd like to invite absolutely everybody. This Saturday, we're going to have a party. We're going to celebrate our schools, all of our schools. It's February 12th, this Saturday, 2:30 at South Park. It's on the gazebo side. This gives us a chance to celebrate, but also to connect and to converse from people all over town. We will have speakers, music, food truck, face paint, a Valentine's video booth to send a Valentine's to your board telling you how much you love your school. I hope to see a lot of you there. And I especially want to say, Kay and Kelly, I really hope to see you there too. In the end, the one thing I hope that we can all agree on is that we need more time. The board, community, and district deserve at least 1 year to make a well-reasoned and deliberate choices in regards to ever closing a school. We ask for reversible cuts to bridge the needs for this coming year, and then a detailed process arrived at by working with a cross-section of the community on how any future school closure proposals will proceed, and make sure they include at least a 12-month timeline. Studies show that learning loss starts when the announcement of school closures happens, not when the schools are actually closed. So we need to respect that and feel that the consideration of such a weighty decision deserves the time and respect of a reasonable timeline. And that's all I got.
Thank you very much. And that was right at 10 minutes.
Oh, phew, I practiced.
Excuse me. Okay, on to our school board members.
Kay, do you want to jump in or do you want me to jump in? Alicia, first of all, before I let Kay jump in, I just want to say that Kay called me last night and she said, Kelly, do you think I need to put together a PowerPoint? And I was like, no. So it's nice. It's nice that you all did. And I really appreciate all the information that you put together. So Kay, did you want to jump in or do you want me to?
If you can, that'd be great. I'm, Remy, he's lovely. So just a moment.
So Kay's Remy is 3, right, Kay? Yes, 3, 4, sorry, Remy, 4. So I will give her space to be a mother, and my children are teenagers, so they will be loud in a different way, but they are here and also making noise. So thank you all very much for having Kay and I also want to acknowledge there are a few other board members here. So Shannon Kimball is here, and Alicia, and Shannon, we might call like a phone a friend if we don't know the answer. If there's a question that comes up, we might ask Shannon to jump in so that folks can hear responses to questions. And I hope you will do the same. I saw a couple of your folks here as well, or a lot of your folks here. And then wanted to acknowledge, I saw Marcel Harmon, who is a former board member. Meryl, I think, is here. And I was remembering, who is also a League of Women Voter former president, I believe, Kristen, I think that's correct. And then also our friend GR Gordon Ross is here. So thank you to all the former board members that showed up, and just thinking about you all and your support is great. Our gratitude is big, and it is also quite big for all the folks at Save Our Neighborhood Schools, and the engagement that you all have centered our community around. It's been, in a time that's been otherwise disheartening, really lovely to see all of the passion around community schools and neighborhood schools and Lawrence Public Schools in general. And I'm grateful. Certainly, I wish it was not complicated by the budgetary circumstances that we are experiencing. But I just want to extend my gratitude to all of you who have been putting in the time and the hours. I think, Alicia, you sent me an email that said we have put in hours and hours and hours. And it is very clear to me that you have done that. So thank you on behalf of your students and our other families. So I also want to thank the League for all of their help, and then just kind of move into Kay and I had a chance to touch base last night, and our hope tonight is to be open to any questions that you all have. I don't want to talk for Kay, but I can say that on the board, Andrew Nussbaum is the educator. I think 15 years deep, and Kay and I are learners. Even though Kay's context is education and my context is education professionally, we are still people that are learning about the district. And so definitely open to any questions you have. If we don't know the answers, we will find someone who does. And then I wanted to tell you personally, I'm exhausted. It has been a rough couple of years. And my year as president really brought me to my knees. I said that at the League forum that you all held this last month has done that again. And there have been a couple of meetings where, not to make this about me, to just share my own personal experience, where I thought, gosh, I'm losing my temper faster than I expected. With people that I agreed with and people that I didn't agree with. So that's what it's like for me, who has a teenager. So I don't have little people in school right now. So I know for parents and educators who are experiencing this in a different way, that you also might also be a little short-tempered with the board. And I want to acknowledge that as a parent and as a board member, that I'm going to do my best to gain back your trust and to try to be a bit more patient as we move forward. And then just to acknowledge, just in general, the loss this community has experienced over the last 2 years. And so just to say that having these conversations right now are quite challenging. If I were doing frequently asked questions, so those, we're getting a lot of emails, hundreds of them, please keep sending them. I think that Marlene and Marcel can both, that resonates, I'm sure, with them, but I also want to acknowledge the bond in which we spent a lot of money on our buildings that we're now talking about potentially closing. And I agree with the community when they say that that is not the action that they expected from the board, and that we should be cautious and careful about that action. I want to extend my gratitude to Dr. Lewis, who is an expert in equity, who is a fine superintendent and a man who is passionate about our students. And I'm curious about his request that we consider consolidations of schools and what that means for our students, because I know that he is not someone who would do harm if he thought that were the case. I'm also someone who has spent the last decade and plus talking about saving neighborhood schools. I led the last initiative, and Alicia, there was a soundbite of me and Scott Morgan for a year of my children's life yelling on the Disney Channel. I'm not exactly sure why. So my evening tonight, I hope not to yell at you. I have a great deal of respect for Scott, so I'm going to control my temper in all regards. And then I just want to acknowledge my deep respect for the unions, both PAL and the LEA. I have spent my 4 years on the board on negotiations teams for a reason. And when I ran, this community asked me to increase wages, and why I'm open to and considering consolidation at all after someone who worked very hard to pass the last bond is because of that reason, to hear that. Alicia's point about time resonates with me. And it's something that I've been thinking about. So I think I'm taking up too much time, and I'm going to let Kay go. I have other frequently asked questions, and I'll get back to you on that tonight.
That's awesome. Thanks, Kelly. So hi, everyone. I'm Kay Emerson, and I joined the board. Guess what? A whole month ago. That's right. A whole month ago. Talk about welcome to the board. So this experience has been interesting, very interesting. I came into the board knowing that, you know, the work that we have ahead. For me, you know, this is a community conversation. This is something in which collectively I feel is a decision that we can make as a community in community. So for me, when it comes to the things that I'm looking for, as I'm kind of looking at like the decisions and such, is that collective response. You know, as we were talking about, you know, there's a thought exchange out there, asking for input. That's great. I also think about, you know, being able to look at the different resources that are available. And I know it's challenging to stay up on the latest information. I tell you, it's a daily chore of mine to kind of keep up with what's new for me to listen to. And so I'm trying to do my best to make sure that information is available for the public. You know, outside of that, you know, I want to have a conversation. I want to have dialogue. We should be having dialogue. I think that there are specifics in this community, and time after time, it's okay that we have to stand up or show up, because, you know, not all of us can stand up, but show up and say that, you know, this is what we value, this is what we want. And I think that is very important to what Lawrence is about, you know, being able to say, that's great, but guess what? This is what we're wanting to do. But, you know, I think that there's going to be some great loss, like with any budget cuts. You know, when we go to the grocery store and you get up to the counter and there's just, you don't have enough money to pay for everything that's in your cart, you got to put things back. I know that's not what we're dealing with, so please don't take me out of context there. But in a way, it is. So I think that this conversation ahead is a community conversation, and my goal is to make sure that we have a seat at the table. And with that, I'll end.
Denise, did you want to? I think she's having technical difficulties. You're muted, Denise. There we go. No?
Still muted.
She's still muted.
There, how about now?
That's
I'm not seeing any questions in the chat. One thing I was wondering about, so in the Lawrence Times today, the executive summary, the 3 different options, are those significantly changed from what the BPEC had come up with before?
So is it okay if I jump in, or
Yeah,
anybody else
absolutely.
want to go? Shannon, Alicia, Kay? I'll go ahead and say. Neither Kay nor I serve on the budget evaluation committee, although I'm guessing that both of us have been watching very closely. I served on it last year, so I kind of have the historical context. The proposals, to be transparent, were not entirely what I expected to see as a board member. And Kay, I'll let you jump in if you want to.
The
So
ones
I
from
think,
last night, Kelly?
yeah,
Oh,
yes.
yeah. I
Do
mean,
you want me to try to share my screen on that? Y'all
Yeah,
okay?
so there, and I'll just kind of talk about the process maybe a little bit. And Alicia and Shannon, if you want to unmic and jump in and interrupt anytime if I say something that feels not right, or you want to add to that. But the process, and one of the things I wanted to talk about in the intro but didn't was around the process. So the proposals that were brought before BPAC on last night were part of the equity analysis, which took our equity policy, translated it into a tool, and allowed the district to the equity council, the Parents of Color Council, or advisory board. Who else was there, y'all? The budget program evaluation committee. And are those the 3 main folks that were there? Kay, am I forgetting anybody?
yeah, there was quite a few others. If you give me a second, I can pull up the list.
Yeah, so it was a group of folks that came together to look at the proposals based on equity and to apply our equity tool there. So I would say that right now in the process, what we expect is that there would be a proposal on Monday that the board will respond to. So for Kay and I, in terms of process, we'll be responding to those proposals in real time because we don't serve on those committees. We each have different committees we serve on. So when you are looking at that information, we're seeing it for the first time as well. And we'll be asking all of the questions maybe that we received from you all in email or from the different meetings that we have with groups in the community to propose to the district leadership to respond to and critique. So the proposals for me, I think, demonstrated that perhaps we're not quite there in a comprehensive plan. In particular, the first option included closing 5 schools or consolidating 5 schools, depending on what language you want to use. And I would say, speaking for myself, because neither Kay nor I represent the board, so we're here talking as individual board members. That's not a proposal that I'm particularly excited about, nor do I think meets the standards put forward by our equity policy. So I would consider other options to be more equitable, and those were not in front of that committee last night. So that's my observation, my transparency to you all. So Kay, do you want to respond to that, or Alicia or Shannon, do you want to talk about that?
So I'll just jump in and be perfectly honest with you. Yeah, there was a meeting last night. It happened, and as a board member, I did not watch it in real time, and I personally was I was at the Lawrence Art Center preparing for Threads, which is a really amazing event, kind of talking about the historical context of Lawrence, and we're creating some really great scenes. Not what we're here to talk about, but just little plug for that. You should definitely go check it out. And so I watched it as I was working today, and I was kind of getting my mind around it a little bit. And so I come into this space and I'm like, I still need to put some more attention to it, because I kind of get what was proposed last night, but I also don't. And that's not what I thought exactly was going to go down. So again, that's just me being transparent, and the reality of the humanness of being a board member. there are going to be those situations, and where, as Kelly said, I'm learning information, we're learning information as you're learning information. And so what was my first impressions? I don't have one yet. I'm still trying to figure out what happened last night, trying to, because this is a moving target. There's all that every day there might be something new that's coming out, and we have something new that's coming out, and I'm really, for me, I'm kind of curious of what actually came, like, regardless of what's in these options, I know that there's a bigger list, and each of those things in that bigger list has an implication on what happens in our schools. And one of the things that are the individuals who were at that table, these were options, but one of the things that they were told that, you know, if there is something here as you're looking through this that you have questions on, or if there's another one that you think should be in here, let us know, put that in there. So when the individuals are in this room, they had these to start off with, but doesn't mean that that's the only thing that they had to respond on or put in there. So as a board member, I'm still waiting to see what's on the that after the what are those two dots called, Kelly, at the end of equity analysis results? What do you call that? That little.
I was going to give you a grammar response, and I know that's not what you're looking for. So.
I wanted the grammar response.
Okay. So I'm not gonna keep going, Kay. Okay. I'm gonna distract. Yeah.
So anyways, so for me, like I'm waiting to see what comes out of that, because that's what's important to me, not necessarily what is in that bigger proposal. I want to know what's the pros and cons of each of those line items. So that's what I got.
I'd like to take a minute to, I attended the meeting as a spectator. So there was a lot I couldn't hear because the tables were far away, but I have had a chance to speak to a lot of people who participated. And there is a lot of rough feelings out in the community and how that proceeded. They were presented with 3 options, and they were only allowed to review 1 option. And these options, as we can see, as Denise or Kristen is scrolling through, these are dense. The information in this is stuff that I have been learning over the past month. And I know, board members have been learning for years, and it is dense, it is confusing, it is hard. In some ways, it's inaccurate in the way it's presented. And to be able to glance at that and then glance at one of the equity components, which also has a lot of language that is limited to maybe a smaller circle and is not accessible to the community as a whole, and have, I think it was roughly 15 minutes to try to analyze both of those at once and then move on to the next one. It is from my viewpoint, but also from many people who have expressed concerns that is not a true equity analysis. It was a performance. And I am collecting those comments, and anyone who's comfortable, I will collect them and forward them along. I think it's important that is also an aspect of this rushed timeline. This is one of those things, an equity tool that came out a week ago and is being put through an 1.5 hour process is not enough time to truly use that tool as it should be used. So if you have more time and can spend some time training the committee members and community members that will be evaluating it, educating them on what each one of these line items means and how that will reflect to the students and the students' harm, then that's what you need to do. And that takes a lot of time. I mean, that takes months.
I mean, I can acknowledge some truth in that. There's a lot of truth in that as you were speaking. I go back to the fact of, okay, so we had one meeting, we were presented with tools and options. We need more training, to know how to effectively use this. So let's provide more training. Let's create a tutorial that we could watch, and then as individuals decide, if, for example, if there's some things that, like, I'm not an expert on, right? And there are some things I was like, I really wish an educator would provide input on. Great. But then there's also some things that, for example, I think there is, here we go. Let's grab this reduction middle school basketball boys. I don't even know. I'm just going to pull that one. what does that mean? How does that impact that whole program? And so sometimes I think that we can even just, as individuals, as community members, think about, what's my question here? What's the question? And then being able to collectively build out the questions that we have and see the trend on it. So I think that there are, so acknowledging that we need more time, acknowledging that we have limited skill sets. We also have to flip that and say, okay, within that, what can I still do? How can I still help? And so I think that that's something, you know, as a board member, I think about, okay, how can I continue to provide guidance to our community members, to individuals who are wanting to participate in this process, because there is something that we can do. So what is that? If that makes sense.
Shannon, did you want to jump in? Not Shannon Kimball.
Yeah. Oh, wait, Shannon Kimball or
No,
Shannon?
no, you. Yeah, yes, thank you.
Yeah, I did have a couple things. Number one, just really fast. I see Thad Holcomb is on here. And I just want to say hi, Thad, because he married my husband and I. So, hi, Thad. Hope you're having a nice evening. What I wanted to say was with regard to the equity tool. So I do work in a school and I have had some training in equity, as it were. And I do, coming into the public schools, it was my first experience working in education. Okay. And I got my first training in what the district, you know, the equity discussion within the district. And I learned about the compass and courageous conversations and such. And it took me, even though I was engaged and I really wanted to learn it, and I reached out to other educators to explain it to me, it took me about a year to really wrap my mind around the concepts of all of that, just going through it in my daily work and all of that. And so I feel like what happened last night and what is being asked of the board and everyone in this discussion is that you're given this very complicated concept, this very complicated rubric, and we're being asked to make really momentous decisions with this. And the rubric itself, for me, I was looking at it as a district person and I was like, oh my gosh, this is really complicated, you know, and I understand a lot of it, but from what I understand from some people that were there, people who got to see this equity tool before and were trained in it, they said that they got for each there's four, I believe, constructs on the equity tool. Each construct, they got a full day training on. And then, you know, we're asking people to sit down and apply those constructs over a 15-minute period to something that's going to have generations of impact. So I think that is what I got out of last night. I also got, and I'm not sure, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but what I understood from last night was that there's 3 options that they've come up with from everything. And that those are the 3 options that they then put through the tool. And then the people, the input they got from these different committees on these options will then go before the board. And then the board basically gets to make a decision based on these 3 options and input given by the committee members. Now, is that correct? Or am I wrong?
Kind of, but not quite. Do you mind if I jump in, Shannon? First of all, just I really appreciated your observations and how you talked about the tool itself. I think it's based on the equity policy, and then they pulled out of that equity policy key points and asked the committee to see how well the proposals or the options aligned with the equity policy. That was the structure of the tool. So as any former board member or sitting board member can tell you, The committee will make recommendations, as Shannon mentioned, and those are the three options that the folks that joined together last night to look at the equity analysis tool applied. To me, that's a starting point. So as a board member, we looked at those options, but those aren't necessarily the end option. So those might come to the board, and then the board has the opportunity to listen to the feedback that we get from the community and say, maybe we need more cuts in administration, or maybe we need to consider whether closing Liberty Memorial or middle school is in the best interest of this district. There are other spaces where we might say, as a board member, just push back a little bit and say, perhaps this isn't the direction we want to go. So the board ultimately has the authority to say, okay, could you go back and try again? So I do want to own something. I am so serious about wages and so serious about ending the disparity of wages that we have in this district, not just among our peer districts around the area. So the east side versus to the east of us. I live on the east side. That's not what I mean. I mean the folks that are in Johnson County and a few other area districts that are earning more money than our teachers. It really bothers me. So I want to invest in ending that disparity. And then also for our classified staff, how do we get them up to the living wage that the community very loud and very strongly told Kay and I, if you're elected, to do something about. So I'm motivated by that wage component. And then looking at the options that we had before us last night, are there additional things that we can do that might contribute to ending that wage disparity? It doesn't have to mean that three options that we saw last night are the end of the conversation. So to your point and to Alicia's point about time, how much time does the board have to make this decision? So I will say that related to the statute, if we were going to close a school, and Denise, I don't know if you had this on your initial slides or not, and I'll let Kay jump in here in a moment. We have
No, it's good. I usually don't think
we have until the end of February, essentially, to announce or to notify a school. But it doesn't mean that that's necessarily a school we're going to close. So we could say to 5 schools, we're noticing that we're considering these schools for consolidation. I don't believe that's the direction of the board, but we could do that. And then we have until March 20th to make that decision. And the reason why I say March 20th is because, as somebody that's on negotiation, and that's my wheelhouse, and I've read the contract a lot of times, we have to, by March 20th, notify any staff if there's going to be a reduction in their position or in the workforce in general, which I believe, based on what I've seen initially, because of the number of teachers that we hire in any given year, we wouldn't see a staff reduction even in any of the 3 options that we've seen, or at least it would be minimal. So I can answer questions about that too. If that seems to be going down a rabbit hole, it actually seems connected to me. So
I have a question related
go
to
ahead.
that, Kelly. And just a real quick, it's Alicia, not Alicia.
Oh,
Just
thank you.
Wanted to give that. Yeah.
Thank you. We met, one time. Sorry.
Yeah. Oh yeah, that's fine. So if the board asks for something different, does that then need to go through the same equity tool and committees?
Yeah, well, so I think the equity tool, this question around equity, and Kay, because I don't want to take up too much space. So Kay, if you want to jump into the expectation, for me, that equity tool was a starting place. So I think Shannon's point about, and your point about, like, was there enough time to really do that analysis? In truth, the board has directed that every decision the district administrators are making should account for equity. To me, this was a layer of additional accounting for, but I don't think was enough. I looked at that tool, and as somebody that assigned students similar projects, I would have wanted a pretty in-depth paper for each single one of those questions, to Shannon's point. So, I mean, definitely, I think this is a starting point. I do believe that we have good leadership in Dr. Johnson and Dr. Lewis to continue that conversation of equity. So this would be the starting point for that conversation, and then we would dig deeper as we went along.
Will that conversation, either Kay or
Mhm.
Kelly, include these committee members that involve so much more of the community?
Yes.
This was the first time we saw a vast number of the community participating.
Yeah, so in the equity policy calls upon us to utilize those committees. So if the board went back and said, you need to make a deeper cut in administration, or you needed to consider different school scenarios, that my expectation as a board member, and Kay, you can speak to it, would be that those committees get to weigh in and advise, particularly parents of color, the Equity Council, and the Native American Student Services. And additionally, those are the ones that are called out explicitly in the policy, but certainly the work that we've gotten from the Boundary Committee and BPAC have been helpful. So okay, I'm going to be quiet. Kate, do you have something to add?
I don't. I think I was just listening, and I had, as we were talking, I had like various things that kind of came in and out, and I was like, no, I'm good.
Could I bring up a question that kind of dovetails on that, unless Denise or Kristen, if you have some backlog of question? Okay. It kind of relates to this in a bit. So how are alternative proposals brought forth that the community member wants to be involved? Is that something that should be sent to all board members, be sent to district, be sent to BPEC? We have not found a formalized process for that, and we would like that to be clear to the community how to do that.
Yeah, so I appreciate that you mentioned thought exchange. So that is a space, not necessarily for a full fleshed out proposal, because I've seen proposals from Save Our Schools that are a little bit more involved and included more extensive data. But if a community member had a suggestion, and similar to Kay, I would love to hear from educators. But if a community member had a proposal or a suggestion, they can certainly send it to the full board, and I will put the full board's email in the chat, or I'm going to ask my former colleague GR Gordon Ross to do that. But they can send it there, and we can then, if you don't know like exactly the correct person to send it to, like who's the finance director, who is the, does the superintendent need to see that? I do think that the board as a governing body can forward those proposals on to individuals in the district. In terms of a formalized policy outside of thought exchange is one space to share your kind of brief impressions of the initial proposals that are on the table. And then the more fleshed out proposals that you have, I definitely would, as a single board member, but additionally, I think my board colleagues would make sure that district administrators saw those.
Yeah, the easiest way that I would answer this question is no, there's not a direct process, plain and simple. But I think that, the board has a role as being gatekeepers of information that comes in. So if you want to make sure that whatever proposal or suggestions that you have gets to the individuals who are going to be making decisions about this, I would tell you to email it to the full school board. And, as again, you can make a specific request in that, can you forward this on to X particular person? But no, there's not a specific process for that to be reviewed or how that's being reviewed. But I do know that, there's been a number of things that have came through and requests that have, I think even last night they were saying, this third option here was came off of several things that we've heard from collective feedback from the community. So again, we are in a space in where your voice is important. Then your thoughts, concerns, which ones you are in support of, because we've been hearing a lot about what people don't support. And if you talk to me, I'm like, okay, cool, but which one of these would you support? And if you're like, I don't know enough about this to know if I do support it, then tell me why. tell me what additional information that you need, because likely I'll need that information too. This is a collective process. And I said it before, we need help. And we can't assume that we can come up with this all by ourselves. And when I say we need help, that means we need you. So.
If I could jump in just real quick. When Kelly you mentioned that you'd like to hear from teachers and from staff. And I do think that that is really important, because you are hearing a lot from parents. And I mean, I kind of wear two different hats. I work in a school and I have kids in a school. What I'll say is that the district could really help you with that. Conrad is often sending out these surveys, school climate surveys. I feel like they could very easily send out one to everyone in the district, all the staff. And I think that this is something that the board maybe should ask for. Send out a survey to the staff so that we can get a picture of where they're at. I want to know certain things that I already know from working in school, but I'd like to know, what are their thoughts? Are they okay with school closures? Do they think that's a good idea? Or would they rather take a pass on raises in order to not have schools closed? Now, I work at a school that's not really on the chopping block currently. I have personal teacher friends, those personal teacher friends, and again, this is just my personal friends, but they are saying things like, if schools close, and this is not their school, I'm going to need a mental health year. I would prefer to take the small amount of money that I would get in a raise, which is not going to be huge. It's going to be, a raise, but it's not going to be enormous. And I would prefer to just let that go for a year to keep schools open. Now, maybe the people I'm talking to are an echo chamber, and that's a possibility, just like it is with, your friends, with people who have similar thoughts and feelings and goals and morals and everything, right? So it's possible I'm in an echo chamber. I would be interested to know, what do the teachers and the classified staff feel? Because I'll tell you what, I got all of a penny raise last year, and I'm due for a raise as a classified staff member. I am. But I would personally go without a raise in order for my children's school to stay open. Now, that's just me, and I can't decide for everyone else, and I very much appreciate all of the work that PAL and the teachers union are doing. But I do think that it would be a great thing for the district to ask everyone, because we're asking the community, but morale is low in buildings, especially the buildings that have been mentioned. But again, I work at one that isn't really at risk. And, I had a staff member crying today, needing a hug, because she was worried about what would happen with transfers if if Broken Arrow closed, for example, and a whole bunch of things shifted, right? What the district would probably have to do is put a freeze on transfers, because parents will be scrambling, right, to get their kids either to stay at their school or to get them into a more preferable school. And what does that look like? Does that mean all transfers will be revoked? I had two discussions about this, one with a parent and one with a teacher today. The parent asking, is my child's transfer going to get revoked? I don't know. I have no idea. You're not going to a school that's getting moved around, but it's possible, yes, that the district may say, everyone go back to your home schools and let's start fresh. And, the teacher was concerned because she saves $500 a month on BGC by having her kids in the school building with her. That's a significant amount of money for her. And so she is crying and upset because she didn't even think about that piece of it. Like, historically, teachers have been able to have their kids at the school that they go to, right? But what are going to be the new rules if, for example, we do this and they have to consider transfers? So I think that these are some really important things.
So I think what I like about what you're saying is not what I like, but what I'm hearing what you're saying is that it's in the details. What are the details of a consolidation? So it's not necessarily like you use the example of the transfer, but that seems surmountable. There in terms of like how we might deal with that for staff, but it's what the unknown is what I'm also seeing from families in different communities where we've named their schools. What is the next step? How many FTE where there'll be for counselors? How many? What are the resources look like if we consolidate these schools? And I think right now we're reacting to hypotheticals, and it causes a lot of stress and anxiety in the community. So as a board member, what I'm hoping for in the next couple of weeks is that we can begin to paint a picture of the direction we're going and shift from this kind of deficit thinking that we do have to address the deficit. That's a statutory requirement. We have to address that by July. So some of these cuts have to occur. We do have to find about $3.5, maybe $3.8 million. But then the additional dollars that you see the district seeking is really to address wages and to respond to what we know is, an environment of inflation. But when we are doing those things and discussing out in the public to be as transparent as we can, the things that we're considering, it does have the response of creating additional anxiety, and particularly during a pandemic. I'm sensitive to that as a social worker. So that's what I was hearing while you were talking, Shannon. And as quickly as we can, I do think it's important to at least acknowledge, not just as an acknowledgement, but really move out of a hypothetical world and into something more concrete. So when you hear me say, these are the three options that were presented last night, but the board might look at something else, that's real. We might be looking at a different scenario than the three that you saw. And I recognize that the longer we're in this ambiguous space, the more distrust that we begin to see in the community. And to me, the concern is that there might be some, when we have to make cuts, we want to do it in a way that the least amount of children are impacted, but also looking at, like, are there ways where there's gained efficiency that benefit someone, either staff or children, but particularly our students. And right now we're in a spot of I think, reacting that doesn't allow for that innovative, creative thinking to say, what would it look like if we made these changes that could benefit us? And I do think that creativity exists within our educational staff, and we need to tap into that.
So what I would say on this, and sometimes when I am listening, I'm like, listen, Kay, don't respond. Don't try to respond. So I go back to saying, guys, people, there are other options on the table. There's not just school closures. Did you see them? How do we make these work? If it's not school closures and we have these other options, guess what? There's still loss in it, right? So what does that mean? If we, I think someone was like, are we closing buildings? Are we closing programs? Or, what, or, and versus how, that concept, there is creativity in some of these proposals that are on the table, but a lot of the focus has just been on these school closures, which that makes sense. It's important, really important, but there's other options on the table that we should be talking about, that we should be having dialogue about, that we should be saying, what, if it's not school closures and it's some of these other things, what does that mean? Mixed classrooms, does that work? Larger ratio, how does that, is that in all our buildings or just a few of our buildings? Is it every grade? What, those are some of these other types of conversations that we need to be having during this time. And I'm not hearing it, so for me, as one of 7, I've heard what people have to say, all the school closures, know how I feel about it. Now I want to talk about some of these other things too. But I need people to start having that dialogue with us. So that's what I would say on this.
If I could say real quick, oh, sorry, Kristen, were you going to say something?
I was just going to say, we are just a few minutes past 8. I don't want to stop the discussion because I think this is a great discussion. And this is kind of the forum that you're talking about, getting feedback that you all are wanting. So if everybody is good with continuing the discussion, we're good with staying longer. All of our panelists are okay with it? Okay, thank you.
Kay, I just wanted to speak to what you said right there. I absolutely agree. We have a lot of people who want to engage in the alternative discussions, but when your space of safety, when your local neighborhood school, when your children are upset and all that's threatened, that takes the emotional energy and that takes the focus and all the brain power. So once we can if we can know that that is off the table and we are focusing on other options, that's when all of this amazing momentum that has come out of just a month of so many community members coming together, working hard, putting in hours, trying to find any possible solution. That's when all of that can shift to the alternatives to find a solution for a year. And then within that year, ideally find a solution that lasts for a long time.
And if I,
But
go ahead, Kelly.
no, I'd rather hear you. So go ahead.
I was just going to say real quick, the other thing that I really wanted to share this evening, that I keep coming back to when I'm thinking about all of this is that, I mean, it has been hard to pick up all of this on top of working full time and have momentum and learn, because this is a whole lot of information, like Kay's saying, it's like, it's all trying to cram it all into my brain. But I'm learning a lot and I'm loving it. And one of the things that I'm really loving is being able to realize that Lawrence has such a spirit of, there's so much love for the schools, for USD 497, but specifically for our public schools here in Lawrence. And I really got to see that the other weekend. I decided that I really wanted to make our Save Our School signs visible. And since I live over by Broken Arrow, I thought, well, what better way to do it than to have a bunch on Louisiana Street? And so I went door to door and I just knocked on people's doors and asked them if they'd be willing to put a free sign in their yard. And I had 20 signs and I handed out 19 of those signs for people to put up. I had 2 people that I knocked on the doors and they were flat out like, no, I'm not interested. No, thank you. Don't care, 2 people that I spoke with were unknown. Both of them took a sign, and I spoke with both of them briefly. And one of those families afterwards, an older couple that lives across from LHS, I drove by and they had put up their sign. And I think that this speaks not so much about support of our SOS movement. Okay, that's not what I'm talking about here. But what I think is really cool about this is that this is such just a slice of Lawrence. It was random people. It was older folks. There were people who didn't have kids. There were people with babies, with toddlers. There were people with that I knocked on the door and I'm like, hey, I had you in garden club. Hey, your kid's in kindergarten, but it was such a slice. It was just such a random picture of Lawrence. And there was so much support for our schools. And so I think that as the school board should take from that is that there is so much support in Lawrence for our schools. And you should feel really good about that. I know that it feels like a lot right now, but I thought that was just so cool. And it gave me so much energy because it was such a wonderful thing to experience, so that I wanted to share that tonight for sure.
I really appreciate hearing that. And I'll respond from this perspective. So there's never been a doubt in my mind, not one day, that Lorenzians are invested in public education. And you see that in the response to the bond that we had in 2013 as an example. So we had an approval, a rate that was pretty extraordinary. And as people from the league who follow elections, I think they would agree with me, that was a really good turnout and a pretty good support from our community in terms of the results. The issue really isn't what happens in Lawrence, the issue is what happens in Topeka. So we are still at 2009 rates for per pupil funding. And the reason why we're talking about our neighborhood schools every decade for the last 4, as KT Walsh mentioned a few weeks ago at our board meeting, is because the cost of running those neighborhood schools when you only have 180 to 200 children is around $6,000 per pupil. And from Topeka, we're getting around 4,500. So those numbers are not exact. There's a little bit more we get from Topeka, and there can be a range in terms of the cost per pupil at the individual schools we're talking about, but that's before we apply title funding. So once you apply title funding, the cost at a school like New York Elementary, which is 6 blocks away from me and which I love with every bit of my being, and that I want to exist for all eternity in Lawrence, is still around, we are investing around $10,000 per pupil. So the question for me, when I ask myself, like, is this doing the thing that we presume it's doing? After 25 years in social services, one of the things that I've learned is all of my presumptions, all my bias, all the things that I think are right and that are absolutely the exact way to operate and are having the outcomes that I expect them to have in terms of students' educational experience, I have to examine. I particularly have to examine under the context of the very limited funding that we are getting from Topeka. So when I think about people at the league who are invested and are engaged in what's happening at the legislative level, we are not getting any more money from these folks. And in fact, we're looking at probably getting less. They're very excited to give money to private education endeavors. So we are facing a crisis in Lawrence that is not the examination of our neighborhood schools with lower enrollments is not coming out of nowhere. We have to, as a board, make a decision about how do we proceed when our reserve funding is $850,000. Marlene, Merrill, when you and I were having this debate 12 years ago, you had about 8 in your reserves, and we thought that was not very much because you'll remember 10 years before that, there were about $20 million in reserves. So what I'm dealing with as a board member, when I was asking Marlene to meet me in my kitchen, it's different. We're in a different place, Lawrence. I want every single one of these buildings, every single one of them to stay. But I need to ask myself, out of good fidelity to this community and to the kids that are in them, are all the things that we presume about them true?
So
and
then
we have to
when,
analyze that.
So that's when I say, okay, awesome or not awesome. There's a list. In that list, there are proposals, there are scenarios. If not schools, then what? Tell me, tell us. If not schools, then what instead? If it's not on the list, throw it in there. What can you lose?
Okay.
I think nothing, actually. In fact, I think you could add that plus. I mean, that's the issue, really, is how do we address it? And how do we make sure that we're doing best by our kids?
There's a question that is in the chat, and the chat is long and deep right here, you guys. One of them is, what shifted from having to make a decision in mid-February to now it's end of March? And where did that come from? And what is the number that we're having to actually make a decision on?
Yeah. So right that actually hasn't shifted. That's always been the same. So the statute around giving notice to schools that we would consider for closure, that's a state statute. And the requirement to do just to notice, to say we're considering this school for closure, has to happen by around February 20th. I don't have the exact date in front of me. So we would just notice. We would say, like, here is the date that here are the buildings that we think we might be considering for closure. And this year we might say we're pausing. There are no buildings we're considering, or we might say we're looking at, a couple buildings. That's the only decision we have to make by the 21st. There's no additional decisions that have to be made beyond that. The reason I said March 20th, that didn't change. That's because I'm on the negotiations committee and committed to the LEA and to PAL CWA. Our master contracts dictate that we need to give notice if we're going to reduce the number of FTE or there's going to be a workforce reduction by March 20th. I don't anticipate that will be the case, even if we were going to look at consolidation of buildings, because we hire in this district between 100 and 120 teachers every year. So even if we look at those options where we see a reduction in FTE, if we consolidated buildings, which is speculation because I don't know right now that there's board support for that, but if there were, then that would need to happen by March 20th because of our commitment to our union. And this district, the board is very committed to those unions and trying to do better by them because we had a salary freeze last year.
Okay. Another, what plan does the district have to support students in terms of increased educational loss and emotional needs when their schools close? In December, the United States Surgeon General issued an advisory on the youth mental health crisis further exposed by the COVID-19 pandemic. And this studies have also shown that closing neighborhood schools causes emotional distress, periods of mourning, and learning loss for students and their families. Compounding the trauma of the pandemic, especially on SES students, our students need a solid framework and wraparound support, both emotionally and educationally.
I would like to let Shannon take that, but I want to add one addition to that. And what does that cost? Because I have heard several times thrown out, we'll put in support staff, we'll put in counselors. Then we want to see those numbers against the cost savings if that is one of the considerations. Now I'd like Shannon to take it.
I don't necessarily have an answer for that because I do not think that the district has an answer yet for that. And Kelly and Kay can yes or no at me, but I mean, and until we're for sure that something's going to happen, it's unlikely that they have a full framework ready to roll as to what that looks like. What I would like to speak to is when we're talking about closing schools and we're talking about community schools and we're talking about neighborhood schools, one of the things that we know goes hand in hand with student achievement and student success and well-being is parent engagement in schools, right? So when you have a parent that's really got high buy-in and is engaged, that leads to better outcomes for students. And so what I think you're seeing, I mean, what I think we're all seeing here with the SOS movement specifically is that you've got a lot of really engaged parents at these neighborhood schools. Now, one of the things that we could draw from that is that, you know, maybe this is a very specific group of parents, but we do have high parent buy-in. And one of the things I think that we're going to see with school closures, even if we're closing one, okay, even if we're just closing Broken Arrow, what that's going to end up doing, if I'm looking at scenario number 2, it's going to impact 9 out of 17 boundaries, which means there's going to be kids shifting around from 9 schools for everyone who's listening. So it creates a domino effect. And the way I've laid it out for other people, I've explained, like, you know, Broken Arrow goes to Schwigler, Schwigler goes to Sunflower, Sunflower goes to Quail, Quail goes to Langston, Langston goes to Deerfield, and then there's some other shifting. And what happens when this occurs is that you have, again, this period of mourning, because I mean, there isn't only going to be mourning from Broken Arrow, there's going to be mourning from the parents who have to leave the schools that they attend, right? Like, not all these families are going to be totally fine with having to leave Schwigler and leave Sunflower. And I think that this is really, really missing from the discussion in the district, because we're talking about closing schools, but we're not talking about how closing one little school impacts widespread community movement.
And Shannon, I don't disagree with this, what you're saying, but we also have to think about, even if we don't close schools, there's still going to be mourning. There's still going to be loss. So we also, at the same time, concurrently, need to be talking about that too, you know? And so I say this because the volume of information around what we lose when we're talking about closures of school, it's a plentiful, like, it's so much information that's been provided on the case of what happens when if we close a school, but there's hardly any information about the loss surrounding the other side. And I just go back to the fact of the matter is, it could be like, I don't know, March or April or whenever it is, and we say, okay, potentially no closure of school or something, but then now we have to deal with, as a community, all the loss around everything else, and we're not talking about it. We're not having that conversation. We're not we're not preparing ourselves for both. And so think about the trauma with that. Think about the mourning. Think about, you know, the how students are going to handle that. Now you have bigger classrooms. Like those conversations, I mean, those conversations are happening. So I just go back to the fact that, like, I understand that we're really focused on like talking about school closures and not school closure, but we have to start talking about the other part of this too. Because if not, then not only are we wasting time, but we're also not dealing with the mourning that comes with the other side of this.
Marlene says, if you don't close schools and initiate other personnel changes, has the district or board done an analysis on what exactly the impact on students would be?
Yeah, that's actually a really good question, Marlene, because you're correct. We have to do the 3.8 million cuts. So if we don't close schools, we have to cut programming and staff somewhere. And then the last night we saw the beginning of the discussion of what looks like those options that were presented last night, 1, 2, and 3, did include a third option that didn't have any school closure. I would say I'm not satisfied with the options yet, and there's still deeper work to do and a deeper dive to do around what those alternative plans would be, what are the other cuts we would make, because at the heart of what you're saying is we got to cut something. And so what are the consequences of those other cuts if we don't consolidate schools? And to be honest, we have deeper work to do to make determinations around what are the unintended consequences of those cuts. None of the cuts that were put before us, maybe save one. There was one that I thought was quite innovative and might equal class size across the district that could be maybe a silver lining. But for the most part, we're looking at cuts in programming and cuts in other initiatives and work that we want to see as it relates to the other end of our equity work. So the other end of what we're doing to create opportunities for students, there's going to be loss.
I'd like to interject and point out that there absolutely is going to be loss and there will be pain felt. Some of that loss is reversible, especially if we look ahead. We're operating right now on an anomaly of a drop in students because of COVID. So as enrollment comes back and some programs can be reinstituted, I believe girls volleyball was recently brought back. There are some programs that are cut, and that is hard and that is painful, but that can be brought back. There are proposals such as school closures that once those are cut, it is incredibly rare that schools are ever reopened.
I agree with that. I think that's a fair statement to say. Kay, were you going to say something about that?
Yeah, no, and I said that, and I think, you know, that's the other part of this conversation, you know, as we're talking. So for example, when I think about the work that SOS is doing, you know, there's this other part of that work that could help and broaden that conversation, you know, and so there are some of these options that have been provided that are reversible. You know, that when things change or get better, you know, they're not permanent. And so I think that there's some of these conversations that we as a community can start having now as we're talking about these other things. And so when I think about SOS, I think about how that this work can also partner in telling that side of the story too. And so, you know, I really appreciate, you know, hearing the passion and seeing all the mobilizing around not close our schools. But it would be beautiful to also see, in a way, some of this champion of these options that could potentially be turned back once. So that's some of the things I would say.
So there are a couple of good things here in the chat, Kay. That's a good segue. One is Katie Morse says a 10% cut to district administration salaries above 110,000 would cover 13 programs in option 3. Why isn't this being discussed? let me also say, Michelle Hyman says, do we have a cost savings number for doing a 9 and 10 high school and an 11-12 high school? In my mind, I see savings, only one varsity team and one JV team. Classes with small enrollment would also be able to be combined. I think that there would have to be additional savings, and I think that they could be considerable. So there's a couple right there. And there also in the chat, you all, several people have volunteered to assist in different ways. So to look back through the chat will, I think, be very helpful. Lindsay Yankee also says, who will be working on the grant proposal for ARPA funds, and will community involvement be allowed?
The ARPA funds are that, so I'm glad you brought that up. So the ARPA funds became available, and Douglas, I actually don't know the timeline for when they became available, but when they did, Dr. Lewis and crew, I don't think the community understands this, so I want to make it really clear. Dr. Lewis, very early on, when ARPA funding, which is the funding that's available from the federal government related to rescue initiatives post would be lovely, but during the pandemic. So when that funding started, when those conversations around that funding being distributed from the county level happened, Dr. Lewis and his team were engaged in those conversations very, very early. So he already was looking at those conversations. So we've submitted a letter of intent to apply for those funds. They can't be used to supplant federal funds or grants. Those of you that are involved in grants or were involved in grants in your professional lives, they can't be used to supplant local, state, or federal funds that you're already getting. So you have to use them to either augment or offset shortages that you have. They likely will contribute, if we're awarded them, to helping us in the short term. And then, Kristen, all of a sudden I lost your question as I started getting down that track. What was the
ARPA one?
Yeah.
Hang on here. Who will be working on the grant proposal?
Oh,
for
yeah. So the
involvement be allowed.
Yeah. So if you look at like the things we in our letter of intent that we asked for, that's available and we can share that. I don't know if I can put that link in the chat as quickly as I would like to, but you, depending on what department is impacted, that person will participate in the grant writing or the proposal writing. Once we see the application, which I don't think is out yet, that would be the finance director for sure. And then if the department were curriculum involved or special ed involved, or other departments would be leading those initiatives. So it'll depend on the particular area that we noticed that we were interested in applying for those funds for.
And the end of that question, will community involvement be allowed?
Yeah, so for the purposes of writing that grant, I would think not, but for the purposes of being engaged in conversation around innovation in different ways that we can look at, not just budget cuts, but ways that we can enhance our schools, there are different avenues in which people can engage in that, but I wouldn't think that they would be involved in writing the proposal.
I think a concern with that comes from initially when we asked about the ARPA funds, we were told by the district that they weren't allowable, which was false upon deep research into the federal. And so there is, I think, a desire for the community to help participate and make sure that.
Yeah, I can see why you would want transparency in that. I think there was a misunderstanding. Just from my perspective as somebody on the other side looking in, I only know that they were always engaged in that process. So they were always engaged in conversations with the county leadership. They had always been engaged in their eligibility. They were trying to, I think, control expectations because of the timeline of when those awards will come in. Might be after we have to make decisions. But I think there were, unless I saw some, what you're saying would be counter to what I saw happening at the district level. So I do think that the district was not opposed to applying ever and had identified areas in which they thought that it might be helpful and augment our services in the district. There was not a aversion to applying for those. It was sort of just controlling expectations around it, because we've already received $20 million in ESSER's funds, so we're not sure whether the county will grant those awards to us. But I hope they do. I mean, and education is listed as a category that counties should consider. So I'm very hopeful
It-
that we get those funding.
And for me, yeah, responding on that, I sometimes I think about like, okay, yes, something happened and I didn't necessarily agree with how it happened, but it has happened. The milk is spilled. So how can we help with cleaning up the mess? Or am I gonna just sit there and scream at the child for knocking over the milk, And so when I think about, I'm really thankful that we have taken that next step in applying for the ARPA funds and noting our intent. And now, now we just have to wait for that next process in where we get more information on what it will take in order to complete that grant applications. And I think that we'll have better answers to provide to the community at that time. Yeah, it totally could have went down in a different way. Man, did I love seeing the support from our community saying, let's do this. And then it happened, regardless how it happened. Now we have to wait till that next stage. So, and at that point, I'm going to do my best to make sure that the community has the information they may need in order to be able to get involved as there's opportunity. So that's what I would say on that.
So the loss of students during the pandemic doesn't seem to be, Susie Johannes says, the loss of students during the pandemic doesn't seem to be unique to Lawrence. It looks like between 2019 and 2020, and then 2021, the state of Kansas lost almost 10,000 students, resulting in a loss of funding for multiple schools. I want to know if there would be support from the board to submit an application for Spark funds to offset the impact of the pandemic and stabilize schools.
So that hasn't been, Kay, do you want to respond?
I think that what I would say, I think that there's always opportunity to look at different funding sources. On this particular one, I don't know much about it. I haven't heard about it. So I think that this is definitely a resource to kind of look into what it means and if it's something that we can qualify for and all those types of things, because when we are thinking about our deficit, it's not just about cutting costs. It's also about what can we do to increase revenue. So far we've only been looking at it from one side, and personally I have not heard about it, but I think that there's always opportunities to look at different revenue sources.
And I can just say about the enrollment drop. So the 2019, of course, is 2018, 2019 is where we lost about 300 students in enrollment. And then we saw additional loss compounded by the pandemic, which in Kansas, we fall somewhere in the middle of enrollment loss, I believe, when you look across the state. But the enrollment loss itself, the fact that our district could lose 600 students-ish around there, and this thrown by it kind of speaks to how precarious our financial situation is, and how serious we have to take that circumstance and be ready to make choices structurally. And it doesn't have to be school consolidation, but we do have to look at operationally, what are the changes we need to make Lawrence a more secure district as it relates to our finances, so that we can do a better job of ensuring, again, that wage piece is a really big deal right now, because retention for teachers and staff and other educational staff is so critical to our district, as they are weathering what is just been a very stressful profession to be in the short term, but also to do that under the salary freeze it's really unacceptable to me.
What I love about this, and this is what I'm talking about. In real time, we just saw a community member say, "Hey, what about this?" And so I'm like looking at it, I was like, what about this? So I now you kind of piqued my interest, and this is kind of where I go to, in some ways, board members are kind of gatekeepers of information that's shared by by community members. I feel like this is Shannon, board member Shannon, something that we were talking about in facilities, but I'm not quite sure. So thank you very much, Susie. I think this could be something.
And I absolutely agree, like looking at those fundings but we really need to look at, in addition to those short-term funds that we can get, we really need to look at a long-term funding that is not just one-time funds. So for us just to look at our structure of how we deliver services in the district that's secure, we're not having this conversation, or that New York Elementary or that Woodlawn Elementary is not every year wondering, is this the year? So we really need to get to a place where our operations are solid, where we're not dependent on grant funding or one-time funding from the federal government, but we have an operational structure that says to our community, we're in a good place. We can take care of you, we can take care of our students, we can take care of the people that work here.
I just real quick, I absolutely agree with you that on that, Kelly. And I think that process to get there is a longer term process. And so that's why a lot of these, some call them Band-Aids, but I like the term a bridge instead, gives that time and opportunity. And I think for that process to be successful, it needs to involve outside third party evaluations and audits. Sorry, Kay.
No, you're good. I would just like, and by the way, if you care about education and what's going on in Topeka, there is some very interesting things coming out of our state legislature this week that there will be hearings on next week. And we would definitely love for individuals who would love to, and I was like, someone else could probably speak to the different Senate bills. But it is definitely going to have an impact if it goes through on our schools and the time commitments that we have just to provide instructional services. But there are opportunities to get involved, write testimonies next week at the Capitol. So if someone else have more information about that, that would be great.
What's going on at the Capitol is going fast and furious. There's so much right now. But yes, thank you for that segue. We are at over an hour and a half now, and I think this has been an amazing discussion. Yes, I don't have the bill numbers in front of me. Anybody else?
Shannon, will you put the link to KASB in that? Thank you.
So anyway, a couple of the things that are coming through the legislature are potentially allowing parents to put students in any district that they want to without needing approval. That's a big deal because that affects teachers and curriculum and space, school space, buildings, everything. So I think that's one that all of us should be really interested in. And of course, again, then allowing people to pull their money, their tax money, and put toward private schools instead of toward our public schools. So everybody needs to pay attention at that level as well. And I love that we've had such a really thoughtful and productive discussion, I think, this evening. There's so much going on in the chat, and there's so many good resources and so forth. The recording of this will be on our website and our Facebook probably tomorrow. So that will be accessible to everyone as well.
If I could say one real quick extension on that, sorry to interrupt you, Kristen. I think the perception of Save Our Schools is that we're formed to save these schools and then that is the end. And I'd like to speak to that. We are in the process of becoming a nonprofit. We have short-term goals of saving the schools and then of hopefully working with the district and the board for long-term financial health here in Lawrence. But then beyond that, we want this to be a group that stands for generations, that is passed down, that is fighting at the state level, so that there are voices there for funding, for protection when bills like this come up, so that there is an organized core that's ready to go, ready to rock whenever anything like this comes up. So we do have very long-term goals, and saving our schools isn't saving these 5 schools. Saving our schools is saving the institution of our schools, our staff, our teachers, our students, our families.
That's great. I appreciate you making that clarification very much. Does anyone have anything else? Oh, and Shannon Kimball just posted a couple of the bill status here in the chat as well. Anybody have anything else before we kind of wrap it up? I hate to close things out this evening, but I know that you guys have had a lot of long nights, and they're not, there's no short supply of those in the future either. So I appreciate
want to
you.
take a moment, Kristen, and just say, you know, I definitely appreciate this opportunity to be here this evening, to have this conversation. And if you don't take anything else away from anything I said, it would probably just be this. You know, you are part of this process, you know, whether if it's concern, a question, a suggestion, recommendation, you know, please reach out. This work should not be done in silos, and we really need community input. So I hope that you stay engaged.
Thank you. All right. Thank you all. And we will stay in touch and stay engaged. So thanks very much. You guys have a great evening. Appreciate you all being here.
Thanks. Thank you all very much.
Bye-bye.